Guess what, Lions? For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to exclusive bonus audio content and help this program grow by joining the Lions of Liberty Pride. To learn more, head over to lionsofliberty.com/support.
Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, it is time for another episode of Felony Friday right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Felony Friday, of course, is a show where we focus each and every week on exposing injustice in the broken criminal justice system. This is the 82nd episode of Felony Friday, so that means you're going to be able to find the show notes page with links and notes to everything that I talk about today with my guest at lionsofliberty.com/FF82. And today my guest on Felony Friday is Michael Krawitz. Michael has done extensive work in the field of international drug policy. He's been very influential in that field and has a lot of information to share that a lot of people are not familiar with. And due to Michael's unique background here in this field, we're going to touch on a lot of aspects of the war on drugs that are ignored almost entirely by activists altogether. I'll introduce Michael in just a minute. Before I do that, I want to tell you about the sponsor for today's show. And this show, once again, is sponsored by MartinArmory.com. And MartinArmory.com was founded on the simple goal of making buying a gun easy and affordable. Martin Armory was founded by Chris Martin. He's a libertarian. He's a small business owner. And prior to starting Martin Armory, he had a very successful career. But he was passionate about the Second Amendment, passionate about making it easy and affordable for everyone to be able to buy a firearm. And that is why he started MartinArmory.com. And Martin Armory has a unique business model set up where they don't try to offer every single kind of gun they can under the sun. They focus on just the 25 top models of handguns, rifles, and shotguns. They offer them at the best prices you're going to find anywhere. So be sure to go check out MartinArmory.com, see what they have, and pick out a gun that you want. When you check out, enter promo code LIONS at checkout for free shipping. Martin Armory was founded by a libertarian. It's a great way to support a libertarian small business. So please check out MartinArmory.com. And with that, let's get started on today's show. Today, my guest on Felony Friday is Michael Krawitz. Michael is a disabled United States Air Force veteran. He served from 1981 to 1986 and was injured in an accident in Guam that was deemed in the line of duty, although not in any way combat related. In 1997, Michael was part of a small team of activists that protected Virginia's longstanding medical marijuana law. It was in danger of being repealed. In 1998, he was part of a United Nations Drug Summit. Since then, in 1999, Michael presented testimony to the National Academy of Science, Instituteof Medicine, and he has been a leader in the international field of NGO drug policy work. He was a key player in Beyond 2008, the UN NGO Drug Summit, and was responsible for submitting the grants and arrangements for the bulk of the U.S. drug policy reform. Michael was responsible for a bill being submitted to Virginia's legislature in 2009 and another in 2012, which reformed Virginia's long-standing medical marijuana law. In 2010, Michael's decade-long fight inside the VA, his fight for adequate access to pain management, it paid off, and he was able to negotiate the first ever medical cannabis policy within the VA. Michael, welcome to Felony Friday.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on the show, Michael. I'm glad we were able to get you because I think the topics we're going to talk about today, we haven't talked about a lot in the past on this show. We're going to talk about really international drug policy reform and how treaties play into that. And for a lot of past episodes on the show, we've brought on people in law enforcement, lawyers, detectives, activists, and a lot of it is focused on domestic policy. So I'm looking forward to getting the full picture of maybe some of the hurdles to legalizing or ending drug prohibition in the United States, some of those hurdles that are set up with these international treaties. And we'll get to that in a minute. But before we go down that road, I just want to ask you about sort of your path. What led you to becoming an advocate for drug policy reform in the first place?
Well, I feel in a way I was kind of drafted into this fight. I was a U.S. Air Force technician. I was what's called an electronic warfare systems technician, and I worked on electronics called avionics. That's electronics on board aircraft. I didn't fly, but I worked on the planes on the ground, and it was a pretty cool job. And I had an interesting career path set out before me. I was actually getting ready to change career paths. I was going to go over to the Army, where they were going to give me a pay raise and put me through training school to learn how to fly a helicopter. Had I succeeded at that, then I probably would still be just retiring from the military now. But instead, I was given the door, essentially. They brought me down to a medical board, determined that my injuries that I sustained in my motorcycle crash that I had over in Guam was too severe for me to continue in the service, and they put me out on a medical disability retirement. And as a disabled vet, I went through, I think 13 surgeries altogether to put me back together, either Air Force or VA surgeries. And then on top of that, maybe 15 or 20 treatments, medical treatments, medicines, different types of therapies, all designed to try to help me cope with pain and the symptoms of the medications that they were giving me. And little by little, I was learning about, I guess, as the rest of the country was learning about, because this was the 1990s, we were kind of learning about medical marijuana. And I learned about it kind of the way the movement did, the hard way, by trial and error, learning, that these pills that they were giving me had very, very serious side effects, and that learning on my own that cannabis could relieve not only the side effects, but relieve the need for a lot of those pills. And I was so aggravated, I was so mad that I had to go through all that trial and error, all that suffering, just to find out in my research, it was kind of the word cannabis, I think, that unlocked the door for me. I looked up the word cannabis instead of the word marijuana. It leads you to a whole different history, a whole different set of information on the web or in books. And when I did that, I found a 100-year-old textbook that talked about a patient just like me, a patient that had internal injuries. I lost my spleen, I messed up my pancreas, my intestines. And they actually talked about a patient just like me and how cannabis was a first-line medicine for that patient. And here I had been, I found cannabis on my own. I mean, the VA didn't even help me find cannabis. I found it literally completely on my own. And still to this day, veterans have to find it on their own. But at least I would say, thanks to my work, a little bit easier they find it, maybe.
So it was the pain management that led you down to finding using cannabis for your own needs. So what led you into activism? What made you take that next step and really start digging into ways that you could actually reform drug policy?
Well, it quite literally was the fact that I was able to find out this information, but at such a great expense personally, so much pain and suffering I had to experience before I could find this information. It really made me very mad. It activated me. And it's funny, but my wife is probably the one that gets the blame for really finally pushing me over the top, because I was complaining about these policies and talking about it so much. She said, "Well, why don't you go do something about it?" Famous last words. I did. And, part of the path, for me, a lot of this is kind of a path. And part of that path was I had had this accident in Guam right when I was getting ready to go on this really big whirlwind trip of Asia. It was a trip that I had set up under military orders. So I was going to have precedent on these planes and fly to Korea and Thailand and all these great places. And when I got out of the service on disability, I wanted to try to do that trip. I never was able to do it because of my injury. And I wasn't able to do Asia. It was just way too, as they say, cost prohibitive for a civilian. So I did a Europe trip. And on that trip, I was getting ready to go across Europe to all these different places. And I was hanging out with some friends in the Netherlands. And I thought to myself, a friend of mine was going to see his family doctor. And I said, can I ride along? I'll go see your doctor and establish a file just so I have a doctor in Europe that has seen me and knows me. If I have any trouble at all, I can refer to that doctor and have somebody that, knows the language, can talk for me. That was really the extent of it. I didn't know, but that was 1996, a little bit before Prop 215 passed. But they already had implemented a medical cannabis access program in the Netherlands. And I was able to actually access cannabis through the pharmacy system, through my doctor. It just totally amazed me that, what had been so difficult in the United States with so many trials and tribulations was actually quite simple and easy in the Netherlands. And that became part of my my presentation, if you will, when I got back to the United States. Hey, here I am. I'm a U.S. Air Force veteran, but I had to go to the Netherlands where they don't owe me anything. And they treated me with respect. They treated my medical needs with respect. My own country that I served in the military that, honestly does owe me something, at least, owes me, some gratitude and respect, if nothing else. I don't even feel that in the sense of my medical needs. And I went actually to the United Nations in 1998 with Chuck Thomas with the Marijuana Policy Project and presented there at the World Drug Summit in 1998 in New York on just that, on the fact that, here I was using cannabis as a medicine quite effectively. It was really helping me a lot. But in my own country, I wasn't able to access it through the pharmacy. I had to go to the Netherlands to have that kind of access.
Yeah, it really is amazing when you think about it, how the United States government puts our troops in such danger in these hostile situations. And they come home, they've seen horrible things. Many are injured, and their entire view of reality is different. And they're not offered medicines. Over the course of history, one of the most beneficial and helpful medicines, cannabis, it's prohibited in this country. It really is incredible. And Michael, when I was talking to you last week, we had a phone conversation talking about this interview. And something that really caught my attention. You talked about a vision that you had with everyone standing around the president's desk. I think this was how it went. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And the president was about to end drug prohibition. And then what happened? What happened in that vision?
Well, let me rewind a little bit before that vision. I in that same set of trips over to Europe, I actually was able to meet up with Chris Conrad over in Netherlands in Amsterdam, and he had set up something called he had helped set up several things. One was a museum, the Hash and Marijuana Museum, Ben Dronker's Sensi Seeds Museum. It's a really great little museum exhibit there in Amsterdam, and I learned a lot from that. But more importantly, I think there was this activist group that I joined called Green Prisoners Amsterdam. And they were mostly trying to prevent the extradition back to the United States of a handful of Americans that were wanted for growing marijuana. Like 100 plants facing 100 years in prison kind of thing. One of the things that we did with Green Prisoners that was interesting is we took a little tray of seedlings, about 100 seedlings of cannabis, carried them on the train, right there, an open tray of little seedlings all the way to The Hague, and showed it to the government. This is what these people are facing, life in prison for back in the United States, these little plants that we just carried on the train here from Amsterdam. And I think even more importantly was a meeting that I attended at this another function that Chris helped create called the Peace House, the Drugs Peace House. It was the Bronkhorst brothers, I think. Adrian Bronkhorst was, I think, the driving force behind the Peace House. And we had a Wednesday night cannabis meeting. And just all this experience and everything just gave me, I think, an international feel for everything. And when I came back to the United States, there was this new thing called the internet. You might have heard of it. and I started looking up international policy and found my way to the international treaties and the drug control program of the United Nations and the U.S. Constitution. And in the United States Constitution, I found a line that I thought was pretty remarkable because it said that treaties, once they were ratified, were considered the supreme law of the land. And later, I came to find out that what that is interpreted as is that treaties, once they're ratified, are a form of federal law, a very high form of federal law. So it's not something that can be laughed off. I think in our country, our government especially has treated with a certain amount of disregard treaties, and I think our citizenry, for that matter, and for that reason, is very kind of disregards treaties, but they are part of our system. Once we ratify a treaty, it's a very high standard, a very high threshold of majority vote in our U.S. Senate to get these things, and it has to go out to the states and get ratified. It's quite a process, and once that process is accomplished, it becomes federal law. So anyway, I had this vision. I can't remember, if it was at night, I was sleeping, whatever. I just remember very solidly seeing us all standing around the president's desk, and the president was getting ready to sign a law that we had, earnestly asked the president to sign, and Congress had duly passed. And someone from the other side of the table, literally the other side of the desk, said something about the treaty, and we were all like deer caught in headlights. We didn't know what to say, and that feeling of being just completely, caught off guard, and the amount of weight that statement of what about the treaties had to the process and to the president, hesitating, holding back his hand on that signature in that vision was pretty powerful for me, and that drove me to try to get organizations that work. I basically chose non-governmental organizations, NGOs as they're called in the UN circles, that were working in medicinal access and or human rights, some kind of aspect of human rights and medicinal access. And I've been working inside the drug policy reform movement. I was kind of an apprentice, if you will. And I had a pretty good bird's eye view of all the different organizations that were working in that sphere. And I literally created a portfolio of these organizations. And to my surprise, I thought I was going to bring these organizations the application to fill out to get accredited at the UN, and they would just sign it and send it in. And they looked at me and said, "What's an NGO?" So it took me like 10 years. I started in the 90s, and it wasn't until 2008 that drug summit that you talked about, where the UN Office on Drugs and Crime got together NGOs from around the world for to create a consensus resolution of what the NGOs around the world feel are the priorities of drug policy. That wound up, I just wound up plugging right into that. I had a portfolio of 26 organizations, and 11 of them were accepted as part of that 300 NGOs that actually went to Vienna and participated in it was 3 days of grueling meetings. And we actually produced a consensus document. I believe that consensus statement is the only one that's ever been created on drug policy.
So what's an example? I mean, you're talking about NGOs, non-governmental organizations. What's an example of, like, what would be an NGO? What type of organization?
Some of the organizations that I brought to Vienna were Drug Policy Alliance. Actually, it was funny. They took Safety First, which was a Drug Policy Alliance project, and they didn't want Drug Policy Alliance per se. That was cute. But it was good because Safety First was a really good foot forward. We had a professor, I can't remember his name, but we had a professor that was representing Safety First. We had Chris Crane with SSDP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We had LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. They've renamed themselves now Law Enforcement Action Partnership. We had Jack Cole. One of the most important players that I helped bring to the table, we had 2 Harvard lawyers in the room. One I brought, and one that came without my help. Deborah Small from Breaking the Chains came without my assistance. She's really amazing activist, and her organization has always been plugged in very well. So she was there, and then I helped, believe it or not, the ACLU, Graham Boyd, to attend. And Graham, really put it very cleanly. We have $1 million budget. However, I can't just go back to the funders and say, I got this trip to Vienna that popped up. Can I get another 10,000? So, my little grant proposal to send all these folks to Vienna and, put them up out there so they could go to these meetings wound up being kind of critical to getting everybody over there, getting this done. But yeah, having the 2 Harvard grad, legal minds, I think was key, because this was a room. It was 300 NGOs. It was such a wide-ranging room. We had kind of what you might consider objective viewpoints of like the Red Cross or whatever. We had the very much anti-drug Narcotics Officers Association or Drug Free America Foundation, etc. And law enforcement against prohibition in the same room, and we reached consensus. That's magic.
That is pretty incredible. But that's a good point. It is important to bring all these voices together, because even though they might be wrong in what they're thinking, they represent a wide swath of people that believe those same things. So in order to form some consensus and actually move the ball forward and put an end to some of this prohibition, some of this tyranny, really, that's super important, I think. And you deserve a lot of credit for pulling that together. One thing I want to ask you about that I'm sure my listeners are kind of thinking to themselves right now, we're talking about these treaties. What are these treaties? What specific treaties are standing in the way of ending drug prohibition?
Well, I think that no matter what you're talking about with drug policy, I think you have to ground yourself in history, because if you don't, then you run the chance of making a very simple error and a very logical error, that you would assume things that aren't true. Like people would assume that more dangerous drugs are more restrictedly controlled than less dangerous drugs, for example. That's not true. It's absolutely not true. Just as an example. I think that you really have to know where these things come from, and where the treaty system comes from. I feel like it's most directly tied back to the Opium Wars. If you want to really, study the origins of our drug control policy at the international level, you have to go back to the 1890s with the Opium Wars in China and Britain. And we had a convention that was passed. It was the Shanghai Convention. I think it was like the 1890s, directly as a result of the Opium Wars. And our, Opium Act, our Harrison Narcotics Control Act in the United States, 1914, flowed right from that. These U.S. laws hinge on international actions. That's another little side point. But what happened was we had these treaties that were passed, a whole bunch of them from 1899 to like 1960. But in 1962, you might remember a fellow named Harry Anslinger. He was the Treasury Department Volstead Act, alcohol prohibition agent that found himself a new career path with marijuana back in the 1930s and helped create the Federal Marijuana Tax Act, which was found unconstitutional in 1969. His hope in 1960 was to help the United States help the rest of the world create a treaty system and ratify that in the United States, in the hopes that would kind of shore up the constitutional standing of this Marijuana Tax Act. As I just said, it didn't work. In 1969, the Marijuana Tax Act was found unconstitutional anyway. Timothy Leary's case in the Supreme Court. But nonetheless, he was instrumental in us passing these new, what you might call an omnibus drug control treaty, the single convention on narcotic drugs. And it's three parts. It's 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. And each part is its own treaty, and the three treaties together makes up what we call the single convention on narcotic drugs. The first one is the one that we talk about the most. That's the one that has, cannabis in it. Specifically, there's cannabis like extracts in the second one, I think. And the third one, it talks about some other issues as well connected to cannabis. Cannabis advertising, cannabis, proliferation of cannabis promotional material, that kind of thing, which is interesting because the entire treaty system, when it comes to drugs, has to be looked at through the lens of your own country's constitution. It's very specifically designed to be a cooperative agreement where the member countries, there's no blue hats, there's no like enforcement squad to enforce the UN, to enforce the drug control treaties like there might be for other aspects of UN involvement in our world. Proliferation of nuclear weapons, for example, something like that. It doesn't work that way. In drug control, it's completely an agreement amongst nations, and if as the free speech provisions in the 88 Convention conflict with our U.S. Constitution, they are just completely invalid in the U.S. I worry about countries. There's 185 countries, and some of them don't really have constitutions or very protective ones. That's one problem. But also, the treaty itself, I think, is based on a false premise. And that is, it's set right in motion, right in the first paragraph of the treaty, this notion that somehow, well, first of all, it says that drugs are indispensable for relieving suffering, and that the member states, these countries, sign this agreement. That I think is very important to highlight, because that is a legal requirement. The countries that sign this treaty, that agree to this treaty, actually and ratify it, are agreeing to a legal responsibility to their own people. And that's something that hasn't been really fleshed out very much. But when something is found to be a medicine, found to be useful, found to be worthy of access, then the countries, by the nature of the treaty, actually have the responsibility to make sure that patients have access, that their citizens have access. And certainly you can look at medical marijuana as a failure on that front. I think that the treaty itself, the premise of the treaty being that non-medical and non-scientific use of drugs shall be prohibited, that only medical use and scientific use of drugs are necessary for the benefit of mankind, I think is a false premise. Mm-hmm. And I think that having just medical and scientific as categories is in itself disrespectful of the human condition.
Indeed it is. I mean, it's really, this treaty system is really taking ownership of all of the participating countries' citizens of their bodies and dictating what they can and can't put in their bodies. So when you look at it that way, it's pretty disturbing. Let's take a quick pause from this great conversation with Michael Krawitz to hear a message from the sponsor of today's show, Martin Armory.
I firmly believe one of the most important things you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones is to own a firearm. But for a lot of people, buying a gun can be an overwhelming process. There are just so many options, and not everyone feels comfortable walking into a gun store. Well, our friends at martinarmory.com are doing their part to change that. Martin Armory was founded with a simple goal: to make buying a gun simple and affordable. Instead of carrying thousands of different guns, martinarmory.com only carries 25. This allows them to focus on providing the most popular guns on the market at insanely cheap prices. And now, for a limited time, their prices are even more insane, as martinarmory.com is offering Lions of Liberty listeners free shipping. Simply go to martinarmory.com, pick an awesome gun, and enter the promo code LIONS. Again, that's martinarmory.com. The promo code is LIONS.
Some of these member countries are, I think, Russia's a part of this, right? And some of these more totalitarian regimes who probably have no interest in reforming any of this. And what would happen if the United States did I don't know if they could back out of the treaty or just completely disregard the treaty and go to start ending the prohibition on some of these drugs? Would there be some sort of response for the U.S. breaking the treaty?
Well, on the first part of that, China, Russia, even France, we've got a lot of real, supporters of the current paradigm, of the drug war paradigm. And it's a real shame, because there's just no way that you're going to be able to ever make, something correct if its premise is wrong. And if I'm right, in this, we're kind of digging a rut here and just digging it deeper and deeper. What's happening right now is really fascinating. Excuse me. I think you can look really kind of an informative lesson in history is to look at Bolivia. Bolivia said that they came to the United Nations, and I was there actually. It was just by chance that I happened to witness this, but the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, got up at the United Nations years ago and pulled coca leaves out of his pocket and did a protest right there at the podium. And I was witness. I was there in the room when he did it. Coca leaves being a prohibitive substance, he was, breaking the rules by carrying that in his pocket and going. When you're a president of a country, you can get away with that at the UN.
Right.
So he made this really impassioned speech about how Bolivia had been signed into the treaties by a dictatorship. The people really hadn't had the ability to be consulted. It was a mistake of history that they signed into the treaty without a reservation for coca, and they made their plea to the body, to the world body, to change the treaty. And that was a good step. It was a proper thing to do, even though it might not have been considered winnable. It was useful, and it was important that they did that, and it was instructive what happened, which was that they could not reach consensus, could not get overpower the Chinese influence or whatever, Japanese influence on the floor, and they instead, check this out, they changed their constitution to give their people more rights when it came to cultivating coca and possessing coca, which I think is something that we all need to look at, our own constitutions, and how much we have protected our right to plants. That's something we can work on in the U.S. and elsewhere, instructive from Bolivia's experiment. But also what they did was they went back to the United Nations body, but this time and they said, we're going to withdraw from the treaty. And the treaty, we're not going to be a signature of the treaty anymore. We're going to reapply, and we're going to reapply with a reservation. And you can't block us from doing this by just refusing to allow consensus. You have to vote us out this time. And it took I forget, it was a simple majority vote, I believe, or maybe a slight supermajority vote that Bolivia had to reach to be able to be approved to do this, and they did it. They got the requisite number of votes on the floor of it's called the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, where they make these decisions in the world body. It's 53 countries that are designated to be on this commission and make out these decisions year to year. And they got it through, and they reapplied, and they are now members in good standing of the international community with a reservation, and it's absolutely legal in their country to possess and cultivate coca that might not be in other countries that are signature to the treaty. So that's a good illustration of one way that a country has been able to deal with this. But what we have right now, we have Canada, United States, Mexico, Uruguay, Jamaica, and that's just in the Americas that I can think of off the top of my head, that are working on cannabis policy right now that is clearly outside of the limits of what the treaty is calling for. And I don't see these countries withdrawing and reapplying. I don't see these countries getting consensus from the international community. Really, basically, the only thing I see left would be sort of like we have in the United States with dry counties and wet counties, where we're going to wind up with wet counties and dry counties at the international level, where we're going to have literally blocks of countries that have alternative agreements that they've set up. That's provided for in the treaty system as well. So you may wind up with certain parts of the world that will have a different treaty system than other parts of the world. I'd rather that not happen, because one world makes it a lot easier to reach patients and get medicine in their hands. And this is really good medicine. And it makes it a lot more expensive, I think, too, when you have to deal with these barriers. Look at what's happening in the United States with the various states that have legal and that don't. It makes a mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously you'd like to maximize the amount of freedom and minimize the amount of black market use. Black markets obviously induce violence. And even if in the United States we do get to a point where we can end drug prohibition, if there's countries around the world that are still having this drug prohibition, still having black market violence, that's not a good thing, even though it's not right in front of our face. So obviously we want to maximize freedom across the globe, and I think that's important to keep that as the ideal goal, as you were saying. So you talk about the path forward, a way that Bolivia dealt with it, and the concern with the U.S. and Canada and Mexico with cannabis policy changing right now. Did Mexico just legalize marijuana or decriminalize marijuana recently?
Mexico had a court case that dictated a change in the federal law, and they're working on changing the law, I believe, pretty steadily. They've created a medical marijuana program at this point.
That's what it was. Okay.
Canada, I believe, is and Uruguay would be probably the most bold first steps towards a policy that would be outside of the treaty. And it's really interesting. We've had these ever since 2008. We've been able to have really good conversations with some of the leaders of our UN drug system. You've got this International Narcotics Control Board, which is a 13-member board, which is supposed to be experts, some of them chosen by the World Health Organization, some of them chosen by the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, some of them chosen by member states. And these 13 members are supposed to act independently and be like the quasi-legal authority of what the treaties mean. And last couple of years, we've had really great dialogues with the president of the INCB. And this last dialogue, just this last March, a activist from Spain asked him a very pointed question about the treaty and the social clubs, and the answer is fascinating. What he said was, okay, agreeing, and I guess complimenting the INCB on their statements on what's called oh gosh, I can never think of all these terms, but anyway, there's a term that they have for the offense not being given criminal status if it isn't needed to have criminal status, and the treaty prohibits drug use, but it doesn't say that you have to criminalize drug use. It doesn't say you have to criminalize drug users. It doesn't say you have to put people in prison for minor drug offenses. Proportionality is what the proportionality of the sentencing, and certainly within proportionality, they're actually emphasizing, even promoting decriminalization. And the social clubs guy from Spain is saying, hey, we're just taking this decriminalization and trying to come up with a safe model, a good, codified model. And why are you not happy about this? Why are you not, on our side? You seem to be pointing at us as part of the problem. And he said, it's the minute you codify it that we have a problem with it. So enforcing decriminalization is a problem with our policy. That our policy requires the specter of punishment, even if the punishment isn't going to be there. I think that right there, if you really dig into that oyster, I think you find just the weirdness of this drug prohibition, that trying to set up rational policies that create safety and prosperity for your citizens run afoul of the law, run afoul of the treaty, you got a problem there. That's what they call not fit to purpose.
Yeah, it is super weird. And you keep saying that the root premise is wrong. But on top of that, a lot of these countries, the United States in the past has been one of them that has benefited from drug prohibition. So you've got some people coming in with agendas.
I think that's the elephant in the room. And first to go on that just for another second, there's quite a bit of corruption out there, and you can't discount that. And corruption can reach every level of government. And some of the governments that are supporting the drug war, I'm accusing them right now of corruption. I'll do that. I'll stay there with an absolute straight face and mean it, without pointing fingers directly at anyone. But the thing is, though, that these treaties, going back to the opium wars again, we had a presentation from another president of a different president of the INCB years ago, who gave a presentation on the 100-year anniversary of that Shanghai Convention, 1999. And he talked about, he gets up there and he says, the treaties have been a fantastic success. Allow me to explain. And I was like on the edge of my seat. I was like, okay, I got to hear this. How have the treaties been a success? This is really going to be good. But he did convince me, because what he explained was that the treaty system was set up in large part as an agreement amongst nations to prevent nations from overtly using drugs and medicinal access as weapons of war, as they did in the Opium Wars, which it was a trade war, a British trade war. defending British trade, making them take more opium trade in China was satisfying the need of Britain to sell more opium for their trade imbalance. You follow me? So I think that, trading off the covert drug wars that we've had in more recent times, and maybe setting that aside and for the moment, in the big picture, overtly using drugs as a weapon of war between nations, you have to agree that hasn't happened since the Opium Wars.
Yeah, but I mean, I see what you're saying, but it's instead they've traded off with just a war on the streets. I mean, you've had wars in inner cities, essentially. I mean, with the amount of violence associated with drugs and the black markets. I mean, it's just been trade off. Maybe you haven't had international conflicts.
Well, I think a perfect snapshot of the weirdness of the drug war in recent days was a report that I was reading a couple years back about Afghanistan, where our forces going in there trying to kind of straighten up what's going on from previous messes that were made, had to allow folks to cultivate opium, because if they didn't cultivate the opium, they would fall prey to these extremists. Mm-hmm. And then they had to have somewhere safe to sell the opium other than to the extremists, so that it didn't profit the war-making capability of those that we were trying to fight. And then on top of that, you've got this glut of opium, heroin, essentially, and in a place that has remarkably high levels of lack of access to medicine. It's surreal, really, when you paint all that in one picture. It's almost like some sort of impressionist painting.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking ridiculous, really, when you look at it that way. Just reinforces why it's not wise to get entangled with the affairs of other countries in ways like that, because it can get pretty nuanced and complicated, and you think you're doing good things then by allowing these citizens in these countries to cultivate opium, to sell it, and then before you know it, what are you doing at the end of the day? It's just a ridiculous situation. But Michael, I really want to thank you for coming on the show. We could talk about a lot of this stuff for, I don't know, hours on end, and I'll have to have you back on to dig into more of this, because I'm sure I'll get some questions on this, maybe some questions on the specifics that you talked about. So before I let you go, though, could you just share with my audience where they can learn more about you, learn more about your work, and how they can help?
Well, before I leave, I just want to mention one thing that we didn't talk about. We have a process underway at the World Health Organization right now, where the 1935 placement of cannabis into the treaty system, that was the evidentiary process that they did for cannabis, was 1935, most recent, is actually being updated right now. So those who are interested in cannabis policy internationally, I definitely recommend them to pay attention to World Health Organization. There's going to be a meeting in November in Geneva. Pay attention to this stuff. And certainly, feel free to contact me or any members of our team. I'm part of the. I represent Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. We're a voluntary veteran service organization in the United States, but we're part of the International Medical Cannabis Patients Coalition and also the New York NGO Committee on Drugs. And I'm in the leadership of both of those. So you reach out to both of those, and it's a short funnel to reach me. Day to day, we update Facebook. Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access Facebook page is probably where I update the most frequently of stuff going on, both internationally and nationally with our veterans work. And that's Facebook.com/USA.VMCA. And encourage people to reach out and learn more about non-government organization stuff at the UN, participate, check out the New York NGO Committee, and check out the coalition and our work.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. Anytime.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Michael Krawitz. I told you that it was going to be a lot of stuff that you haven't even thought about before. You probably, haven't really put much time into reading about international treaties, how they impact the war on drugs, what we need to do in order to change things and mend things in these treaties that could somehow help us back here in the United States to move the war on drugs forward. So really educational stuff, and I'm going to encourage you to go to the show notes page at www.lionsofliberty.com/ff82. Check out what I linked to there for more reading on this stuff. And really, guys, I don't have a lot to add today. Full disclosure, I'm recording this a little bit ahead of time because I'm taking a week of vacation. You know, even libertarian podcast hosts need some vacation, some time away. So need to take a little vacation, so I'm recording this ahead of time. So I'm not going to do a long conclusion here. From the heart, guys, the reason we do this is to spread the message of liberty. And I've been reminded a couple of times recently from speaking with some friends, from talking to people, talking to strangers online through Facebook. I've been reminded just how far we have to go. And I did put a post up in the Lions of Liberty forum a little over a week ago talking about this, but I really do think that you guys probably know this, but I was just kind of slapped me in the face over the past couple days that we are not close to where we need to be from an educational perspective, getting people to understand the principles of liberty, getting people to understand that a society is better, society is more just, where we're not putting people in cages for putting a certain substance in their body or transacting a substance, buying a substance from someone else that is on a government list that says you can't buy that. It's not good. It's not good, guys. And we have a long way to go. And there's a lot of people who support the war on drugs, who think that, a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump, I believe this, really support Jeff Sessions. And they really think that, all they needed, Trump's doing the right thing by putting Jeff Sessions in. He's hard on crime. He's tough on crime. He's going to lock these criminals up and he's going to clean up the streets. That's what a lot of Trump supporters voted for. And that's really unfortunate. And it's even more unfortunate that people on the left, the liberals, it's hard to ally yourself with liberals because they're so freaking crazy today. I don't even know what liberals even stand for, what progressives stand for, what they're trying to accomplish. It's also PC and social justice warrior. I don't even know where they're coming from. It's hard to even have a conversation with liberal. And then when you go to try to have a conversation on the other side, on the right, with so-called conservatives, Republicans, it's not good. It's not a good situation, guys. And we have a long way to go. And I guess what I'm saying is, this is long-winded. I really didn't plan on talking about this for this long, but I've been doing this show for coming up on over a year and a half. It'll be obviously 2 years, the end of this year. 82 episodes of Felony Friday. Long before that, I was writing many, many articles for years and years. And I'm passionate about this. I'm not doing this for my own health. I'm not doing this to make me feel good about myself. I'm doing this because I want a better world for me and my family and my daughter and my future children that I'll hopefully have and my future grandchildren someday. I want a better world for them. I want a better world for your children, your grandchildren, your family, your friends. That's why I'm doing this. So I'm just going to ask you guys, if you've been listening to this show, if it really resonates with you, if you find yourself nodding along and saying, hell yeah, let's end the war on drugs, step up to the plate, share the show, talk boldly about this stuff, because guys, we have the answer. We need to stop being ashamed of our beliefs. This is a crucial point in our nation's history. So much mud in the water. It's hard to even understand what the left and right are doing. If us as libertarians, as the libertarian movement as a whole, without even saying the Libertarian Party, because they got their own freaking problems, I think we all understand that. If libertarians as a whole can just speak clearly to our neighbors, to our friends, share shows like this one, share shows like The Lava Flow, like Johnny Rocket Launchpad, We Are Libertarians, Jason Stapleton Program, Tom Woods, Part of the Problem with Dave Smith. Share shows like that with your friends. Share all of these shows. And guys, the time to change the world is now. The media landscape is changing entirely, and we need to capitalize. The time is now to step up. So with that being said, guys, I'm not going to say really too much else here. You guys know about the Lions Pride. I'd really love for you to be in it. We have as I'm recording this, about 30 members. It would be great to have 3 times that. So you can sign up for the Lions Pride at lionsofliberty.com/support for as little as $5 a month. And if you can't give $5 a month and you enjoy listening to this program, I hate to be direct with you, but I mean, come on. It's $5 a month, guys. That's a cup of coffee a lot of places. Unless you're in LA, then maybe a cup of coffee is $10 a month. I don't know. It's pretty expensive. But anyway, $5 a month, lowest tier, $10 up to $25. You get more perks, more stuff, the more that you donate. And would love to have you at $25. We're starting to get some more people on that monthly conference call at $25 a month. Also, Lions of Liberty store. Brian McWilliams released his Electric Liberty land design. Check that out, lionsofliberty.store. I'm going to be releasing a Felony Friday design. You can check that out at lionsofliberty.store. I'll be announcing that in the Lions of Liberty forum. You can find the Lions of Liberty forum on Facebook by going to Facebook, putting Lions of Liberty forum in the search bar at the top, and we'll get you approved as long as you're a real person. That is our private Facebook group. We're talking about, there's great conversations about liberty going on every single day. So get yourself in the Lions of Liberty forum. And lastly, Donors C. And I'm not going to talk about a specific project for Donors C because I'm recording this very much ahead of time. And probably by the time I talk about the project, you guys probably will have funded it. So all I'm going to say is go check out the group on Facebook, Walk the Walk. It's a group headed up by Clint Rankin. He's a member of our Lions of Liberty forum. He's a member of the Lions Pride. And he's put together this group. And he's pulling together libertarian podcasts, libertarian activists to walk the walk. To actually, libertarians always talk about funding things through private charity, changing the world through private charity. We don't need coercive government. Well, this is libertarians stepping up and walking the walk. So please join Clint's group, Walk the Walk, on Facebook. That's all I have for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening to my rant here today. And thank you for allowing me to get this off my chest. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.